Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this video we're not going to work on race cars, or we're not going to a racetrack, but I have to build a door for the tower room. And the door in the tower room has some pretty awkward dimensions, and that actually means that I cannot go out to any store and buy a door off the shelf because the dimensions just won't fit. And probably the style won't fit either, so there's only one thing left, is building your own door. And the kind of door that we're going to build in the tower room is something like this door right here. So we're going to create first a frame all around it, and then we'll attach the planks to it. I'm going to use real oak for the door, so it will be a solid oak door. And this is the oak that I got about a year ago, and you might remember when we did the ceiling, we bought a whole pallet of oak planks, and here they are. And these are a little bit dirty for the moment, but they're raw, so we have to put them through the planer, and then we should be okay to put a tongue and groove on it so we can connect them together, but you'll see all that very soon. So let's see how wide the door is, both on the top and at the bottom and in the middle. And I think if I go for 1 meter, I should be all right. So now let's measure the height, and the door has to rest on this beam here. So let's see what it is on this side, and then we measure the other side just to make sure that we have a good measurement. And I think this is 184. I'm going to start with creating the planks for the door. And the door is 1 meter wide, so now I have to figure out how many planks I'm going to need. And therefore I'm going to measure the width of the plank, and let's say this is 15 centimeters. If I now divide the width of the door by 15, then I know I have about 7 planks, which is 105 centimeters. Now that's really on the edge, because the planks, they're going to get smaller, less width, once I put them through the planer. And we still have to apply a tongue and groove on the plank, so that's going to reduce it with another centimeter. Therefore, I'm going for 8 planks, which actually gives me about 120 centimeters width for the door, which is more than enough and have enough plate. Now, there are going to be 2 planks that I will not completely finish on the sides, and that is the extreme left and the extreme right plank, and those will cut equally to the same width, so we have a perfect match on the door. When I refer to tongue and groove, this is nothing more than a cutout in a plank in the thickness sense that is going to cut out a sleeve basically, or a groove, and this is what you see here. This is the knife that will do it. And then the opposite plank, we are going to apply a tongue to it, so a piece that will stick out, and this is this knife that we're going to use to cut out that tongue. And then the 2 planks, then they can easily join together like this. So this is what we call tongue and groove. And I know sometimes I say teeth and groove, but I've been reminded that that is a wrong statement. So my planks are not really straight, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut them first to length, to about 1.90 meter. That gives me additional play, because my door is only about 184 centimeters, but it's always good to have that little bit of extra, and we can always cut it off later. Now, if you can get planks that are nice and square from the start, that is a different story, and it's going to save you a lot of time, but you will pay a lot more money for it. So I'd rather have cheaper planks, and I'll do everything myself. And here you see what I mean. See how this plank is not having really a straightforward line? And I'm always trying to cut the plank in the best possible way. The next thing I'm going to do now is to create one straight side on the plank. So when I'm talking about straight, this is what I mean in the length of the plank. And I'm going to do this on the planer, but you can do this in many different ways. You can do this with a circular saw if you want, and if you can cut that straight, that's great too. I'm doing it on a planer because that's what I have available to me. Now, if I'm going to do this, I'm always going to look on the side of the plank which is hollow. So the hollow side, that's the one I'm going to start cutting parts off. I'm never doing it on the other side, because that has always worked best for me. So the hollow side is always down to the planer. So I finished with the edges of the plank, at least on one side, to make that square. So now we're going to do one side of the surface of the plank. And this one I have already done. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a close-up so you can see what the end result is by just putting it on the top of the planer. And this is the plank that we have put on top of the planer for the second time. So we have one edge on the side and we have the top side. Now this is now ready to go into the thickness planer, but before I do so, I still have to finish up the other planks. So now that we have done the planks on two sides, now we need to put them through the thickness planer, and therefore I'm going to check first of all my thinnest plank, because that's my reference for setting up my thickness planer, and also the thickest plank. And this one is the thickest one, and you can see this one is almost like 20 millimeters and the other one was around 16 millimeters. So taking 4 millimeters off one run on the thickness planer is not a good idea. So I'm going to set the thickness planer to 18 millimeters for my first run. And that should be about it. Now the planks are done on three sides, twice in the width and once in the thickness. But we still have to do one side, which is the other side of thickness. And all these planks, as you can see, they are not of the same height. They have different heights, and of course they are not 100% straight yet on one side. So I have to put these back through the planer, so for the proper thickness, but now in the height, and I will have to measure each plank. This is 15 millimeters, so I'm going to set it for 15, and then I'm going to go through the planks one by one until they're all straight, but not necessarily of the same size. So here are all the planks, and as you can see, they are all of the same thickness. That levels out real well. And of course there are no gaps in between them because we have put it through the planer and all the planks are now very straight. So now it's time to apply the tongue and groove on the edges of the planks. So this is the groove knife, and you have to make sure you place it in right, because otherwise it's not going to work too well. And it could be very dangerous. Now it's locked. So we've cut the groove, and now it's time to cut the tongue. So I just need to change the knives on the router, and then we can continue. There's no need to readjust anything because we have everything aligned already, and I just need to swap out the knives. And this is the finished tongue and groove. So the planks for the top of the door are now finished, and that looks quite all right. So now we need to make the frame so we can put the planks onto the frame. And I already have cut the planks for the frame. They are thicker than what I did for the planks for the surface of the door. I've put them through the planer already, like you've seen with the other planks, and I've cut them to length. And the first thing we need to do now is to joint the frame together. And the joint that I'm going to create is what we call a mortise and tenon. And that is a very strong joint. And I have already one prepared, so you can see what I mean with this. So on one side we have the tenon, and this is the tenon. And on the other side we are having the mortise. So the mortise is actually a sleeve that we cut into the wood, and then the tenon is the part that goes in there, and you can see I rounded off the edges a bit so it can go in very smoothly. And then we're just going to put this together like this. And it has to be a little bit tight, but not too tight either. So this is going to be, when it's all the way at the end, and I will have to knock it in for the last little bit, this is going to be a very, very solid joint, as you can see. And that's ideal for a door. So as you can see, it closes up quite nicely on both sides. So now we have a very solid connection. And in fact, that by itself should be good enough. I'm still going to put some glue inside, and then I put some wooden tabs through it so to hold it in place. And I'm going to do that with 2 tabs that will go through it. So let me show you now on how we're going to make this. I'm creating the tenon by placing in a horizontal saw blade onto my router. And by just moving my piece along, I can cut it like this. And you will see me doing that, but I want to show it to you now, otherwise I can't talk because it's a bit loud. I flip it over and I do it again. And then at the end, I'll do each side, like so, and I also do the other side. And once I'm done with this, I basically have cut out this part, but I still have to do the sides here. And that I'm going to do on my vertical saw. Cut these pieces off. I actually have my circular saw set to a certain height, which is just enough to cut the edges. And then I just line up my piece, I turn on the saw, and I go over it. And this is how I actually make it. I flip it over, and I'm done. Now I have my tenon. Now there's a million ways to skin a cat, and this is the way I do it. So now let's look what we do with the mortise. To make the tenon, I'm going to drill that out, and again there's different ways of doing it. You can use a chisel if you want to chisel it out, but that's a bit more difficult. So I'm going to drill that out with a special bit that I have here, and all I need to do is tighten it up. And then I'm going to move this thing in and out and just cut it out. I'm going to do one side at a time, move it a bit, you know, cut it out, move, cut it out. And when I'm done, I'm going to move back and forth to make a smooth cut. That's all there is to it. Now, of course, you have to adjust the height because that hole has to be in the right position so it fits perfectly to the tenon, and you've seen that. So you have to do a little bit of measurements to do that. I can't tell you how much that is, but what I always do, I first make my tenon and then I line it up with it, onto my wood here, and I'll show you on how I do that. And that's, for me, has always been the easiest way to do it. So I always start by making my tenon, and once my tenon is made, I can then make the mortise. So what I do is I place this both on a very flat surface, and I just use my pen and I trace around it. And then I'm going to flip things over, and also this one. And then I mark it again. And there you go. That's the part I need to cut out. And if you do it like that, it's always going to be a perfect fit. Remember what side is where, because you might want to mark things where is what. So I have now aligned my plank on the circular saw so I know how long my tenon has to be, which is about 6 centimeters. So now I can turn it on and we can cut the first side. Then we flip it over, we do the same thing. Put it vertical. And that's this. So let's see how long my tongue is. And that's about 6 centimeters. So this is good. So now what we need to do is cut off the pieces like this, and that's what we do on the vertical saw. I have set my vertical saw to the right height, so I'm not going to cut into the tenon that I just created. And also I aligned my plank so that it's going to cut on the right length. And this is something you need to figure out on your own pieces of wood, depending on how wide and how big the mortise and the tenon is going to be on your application. So let's see how that looks like. I think it should be all right, but you never know. All right, and here it is. That's the first one, and as you can see, that is a very nice clean cut. I'm now going to do the other one. I know the edges still have to be rounded off. For that one, you can sand it off, you can cut it off, you can use a chisel. It will have to be rounded in my case because my mortise is round on the edges. So let me place this on the side. Now this width should be exactly the same width now of my mortise. And I think it actually is. So let me take my meter. So let's check this out. And this is exactly 1 centimeter, and this is what I needed to have. Now I have to make the mortise. And I'm not gonna do it all the way here on the top, like so, because then I have a very little piece of oak left. So it's better to lower it down a bit, so I have more support on the top. And it doesn't really matter, because if you look on very old doors, you'll see that they do exactly the same, or at least where I live. So let's see how far we're going to move this out. So I think I will place it at about 3 centimeters. I'm just going to give it a mark. So let me mark this and here, and that's all what I have to do now. I'm just going to put the markers up now for my mortise. So my mortise will go right here in between those two extremes, and you should see that this is going to be the same. There we go. I have the piece of wood installed and I have my markers, so now I can move this back and forth and drill that hole. So this is now the first thing we're going to do. Now I have aligned already my table before. You've seen the first piece we made when I've given you the example of the tenon and the mortise. That was my first test piece, because I always make a test piece first and then I align everything, and then I don't need to worry about it anymore. I can just continue working. Here you go. So all the joints are now finished, and now I can actually assemble the door frame. And for that I'm going to use some clamps to hold it together. We put some glue up, and then we're going to let it sit overnight. And hopefully it stops raining, because it rains like hell. And I'm going to use some white glue just to put these joints together, and this is extra strong glue. They come in different brands, not that I'm making commercial for this one, but this is a pretty good glue, just in case you would wonder what glue I'm using. I'm not using polyurethane, because that makes too many dirty spots, in my opinion. If you drip it on something, you can't hardly get it off, and it really gets into the wood, and it's always a dirty spot. I won't have much to say while I'm gluing, guys. I'm sorry. I only have like 15 minutes of open time. Not a lot, but that should be more than enough. I don't need to get them all the way in because I'm going to squeeze them in. You might have noticed that this guy is a little bit shorter, and the reason for that is it makes it easier to assemble. And you want to make, let's see if the door is square, because we may have to adjust it, and that looks very square, so I'm happy. The next thing to do is to put these tabs in. So I'm going to drill the holes. Those are 10mm holes, and then we put these tabs in, and that will hold it all together. So no screws, no nails in this case. It's going to stick out on both sides, but it doesn't matter. We'll cut it off tomorrow when everything is dry. The glue has cured overnight, and now we should be able to put the planks onto the door frame. But before I do so, I will have to cut off those wooden packs that we knocked into the frame yesterday. So let's do that first. Next is cutting the planks to length. What you just saw me doing is placing the planks onto the frame of the door to make sure that the planks that are going to fill in on the right hand side and on the left hand side are exactly going to be the same size, because those are not full planks, so I want to make sure that those are more or less the same. So now with that in place, I'm going to install those planks, mark them off, and then we'll cut them on the circular saw. So now I'm just going to trace that plank so we can cut it. So that's the side that we need to cut off. I'm not going to cut the other one yet, that's for the end. And of course I will apply some glue. So now it's time to put the screws in, and these are the screws that we're going to put in. And before I do so, I will pre-drill the oak planks with a small bit. And then at the end of it, I have here a shaper, which is actually the same concave shape as the screw. So I can sink in the screw in the wood, and then I can fill it up later. There we go. And you don't want it to have it too deep, but just deep enough because you want to fill this up. So I'm using my sawdust for covering up those screws, and you might have to sift this a bit. But if you have your sawdust and you mix it with white glue into a paste, then you can stick it on there, let it dry, and then you can sand it afterwards, and you will have exactly the same color as the wood. And that avoids you to going out and buy expensive paste in the store. Now I'm going to continue to screw down all these planks onto the frame, and you've seen how I've done it on one plank, so I'm not going to show you all the rest. Once I'm done, we get back to the door, and then I'm going to show you on how we're going to build the lock on the door and the hinges. I've finished fixing the planks to the frame, so now we need to fill up all these little holes where the screws are. So this is the way I do it, and it might be different for somebody else, but this seems to work quite well for me. I'm just filling up these little holes with some glue, and that's where the screws are. So I'm just going to let that sit there for a few seconds, and then I'm going to apply on top of that some of my sawdust. And I'm just going to rub it in. You don't need too much glue because I think I just put a little bit too much up on one of them. Now here's my sawdust. And I'm just going to, put it on there. And let it sit for a while. And then I'm just going to rub it. I'm going to let this sit for a few minutes, and then I'm going to do it one more time with a little bit less glue. Put some fresh glue on, and again I'm going to put my sawdust on top, and voila. So here we have a fairly big hole in one of the planks, and it's about the only one. So I could have thrown away the plank, but I decided not to. In fact, it doesn't even disturb me. But if you want to fill it up, you can. You can make a little piece of wood and make it fit more or less. And then we're going to glue this in. And then I'm going to fill up the edges with glue and sawdust. So let's fill this guy up. Now this is how I do things. You might not want this, and you might want to have a clean plank. So it's all up to you. It's all about the style you want to make. So let me see, and I'm going to push that in. And then once we are done with it, we will sand it all down. So now I'm going to put some sawdust on it. And in this case, I'm going to let it sit for a few minutes. All right, and that will be good enough for now, and then later on we'll sand it down, and that should be looking a lot better. So now it's time to install the door lock and the door handle, and this is our door handle. It's a bit old style, and I like this kind of stuff. This has been around like for 100 years or more, this type of door handle, and you can still get them, and this is actually a brand new one. There's a little rosette that goes with it, and this will be the back side, and that kind of system will fall into this little piece here. So whenever the door closes, you will have to lift this up or down. So to put this in place, I'm just gonna drill a hole here so I can put my door handle through it, and then on the other side we'll install this little lock mechanism. Very simple, very straightforward, not what you probably expected to see in terms of a door handle and a lock, but this is just very simple, straightforward, no nonsense. And that's it. All we need to do now is to connect the other side. And this is the other side of the door handle. In fact, this is the actual lock. And these are the hinges that will go on the door. I can't really install them now. That's something we'll do inside the tower room once the door is in the door opening. So I can adjust the door so the hinges will be in the right spot. And here is the door, all finished. So now I will have to get it into the tower and then put the hinges up, and then we should almost be done, besides the fact that I still have to sand it and then oil it. So let's see if the door is going to fit. little bit of fiddling, but the door is actually in. Good. So I'm going to put some spacers up. So folks, we are nearing the end of this video, and as you can see, the door is now in place, but we still need to sand it and then oil it. And there's some small things still to be done around the door, but that is something for another video, because we have still more work to be done in the tower room, like putting plinths up and the heating elements and the lights. So I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.